While the poll is ending, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Initially, we were going to have Dr. Martin Chilvers. Marty's feeling a little bit under the weather. He is here as a backup, but his voice is really weak and hurts, I'm sure, to speak. So Marty has a very trusted colleague. Jill Check is a PhD student, and Jill is going to be delivering the presentation today. So Jill, it's all yours.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Jill Check. I'm a student of Marty Chilvers, and I'll be filling in for him today. And I'll be talking about white mold management in soybeans specifically, but a lot of this also includes dry bean work as well. So first off, let's talk a little bit about white mold and its distribution in the US and Canada. It was a mild a disease of moderate importance before the 1990s, but it seems that there was a large increase in distribution in the 90s. And looking back, that may be due to a few different reasons. So first off, variety changes in the genetics of the soybeans we're planting that may be making them more susceptible to white mold. Changes in some of the agronomic factors, so narrow row spacings, higher planting populations, these kinds of factors that are pushed for high yielding soybeans are also conducive to white mold infection. Increased area sown. We don't think of white mold as distributing very wide, but if we have a lot of soybeans grown within a small area, we can see field to field movement perhaps. Increases in irrigation, changes in our herbicide practices. We know that there's some kind of mechanism of triazines, right, that are used in corn. And of course, we can't discount potential effects of climate change in the region as well. So when talking about any disease, it's important to remember the elements of the disease triangle. So we'll go over those quickly, specifically to white mold. First off, we have host susceptibility. So host susceptibility is important both in the factors of like differences in variety tolerance, differences in the genetics of the seed you may be planting, but also specifically for white mold, what crop growth stage that plant is at. We know that the white mold fungus can infect during flowering. So when we're worried about white mold management, we're really focused on that R1 to R3 growth stage. The second component is environment. We know that white mold really loves these nice foggy mornings, cool temperatures, wet temperatures, some of the recent weather we've been getting here in Michigan. And we know that plays a role when we talk about microclimate and row spacing as well, right? So what are those conditions within the crop canopy where we're worried about white mold developing and spores being released? And finally, pathogen presence. Since white mold is soil-borne, we know that it can be kind of patchy, even within fields, between different fields you may have. So it's important to keep track of where your problem areas are, maybe low-lying parts of your field that are holding on to moisture for a bit longer, where we're seeing the worst white mold damage. So here's a photo from Martin Nagelkirk back in 2014. 2014 was well before my time at MSU, but when we talk about white mold here in Michigan, 2014 is always brought up, the 2014 epidemic. And so here we have a photo of a field that was taken out pretty bad by white mold back then. And so we try to look back in 2014 and think about what factors may have contributed to that year being such a bad year for white mold. So we'll go through a few of those right now. This is a photo of a figure from NOAA that's looking at ranking different years in terms of their maximum temperatures historically across the US. And if we look here at Michigan, in July 2014, we had the 5th coldest July on record since 1895. So temperatures during flowering were much cooler. And we know that white mold really appreciates that, right? And if we look at precipitation ranks as well, Central Michigan was much above average for precipitation, and a lot of the rest of the state was above average as well during that July of 2014. So the combination of both really cool temperatures and wet conditions probably drove that that severe 2014 epidemic. So when we're starting to, we're in June now, we're starting to look at the month ahead, look at the flowering period of soybeans. As those weather patterns pan out, those are important things to keep in mind when you're trying to plan your management for the next month or so. So now we'll get into a little bit on the different factors we can think about when managing white mold. We already mentioned row width and planting population affects the microclimate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. Soybean variety intolerance, there's no varieties that are completely resistant to white mold, right? But we do see differences even within a single company's seed catalog. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're picking out seed to plant and you're thinking about your management plans. And if we're going the chemical control route, well-timed, efficacious fungicide, both of those aspects are really important, the timing and the efficacy of the product you're choosing to put on. And we have some tools as well to help with those decisions that we'll talk about. And finally, the history of the disease in your field and which areas of your fields are most problematic to make sure they get the attention they need and the intervention they need. So here we'll talk about row spacing and microclimate as it affects white mold. When we talk about white mold, a lot of the work we do focuses on when these apothecia pop up in the soil. And these apothecia are just kind of like they're like the mushroom structure of the fungus. They are what's germinating from the soil surface and releasing those spores to infect flowers and cause disease. So when we're talking about white mold, we're worried about the apothecia. So a few years ago, we had a researcher, Mamadou Fall, do some work looking at the effect of row spacing and white mold. And so what he did was to go through different plots with these different row spacings, 14-inch row spacing and 30-inch row spacing, and count the number of apothecia he saw pop up throughout the year. And so we look at this red line right here for apothecia. In our 14-inch row spacing, we peak at about 700 total apothecia, but in our 30-inch, we peak at only about 11 or so. So taking that into account, there was 60 times more apothecia in the 14-inch versus 30-inch, which is like a major difference when we're talking about your risk factor for developing white mold later in the season. If your apothecia count is way up there, there is a very high chance you're going to see severe losses from white mold once that mycelium develops. And not only did he see a difference in the number and abundance of apothecia between these two row spacings, he also saw that apothecia and spores were seen earlier in the narrow rows versus these wide rows as well. So as that canopy closes a bit earlier in that narrow row spacing, those are better conditions earlier on for those apothecia to develop. Here we're looking at soybean variety tolerance and resistance and how that impacts white mold management. So we have these different points here, and they're labeled with their relative maturity rates. And I'm fairly certain these are all different varieties from within the same seed company too. So that's important to keep in mind. But really the takeaway here that we're trying to show that there are differences among the genetics within a seed company even for white mold resistance. And so over here where we're seeing higher disease severity, we're seeing a lower yield, a greater yield loss. And these also tend to be the later maturity groups. So 2.9, 2.8, 2.7 compared to some of these earlier ones as well, 1.5, 1.6. So important to keep in mind, important to talk to your dealer about, even though there is no complete resistance, complete tolerance, it is something to consider. So now we'll be moving on to some of the chemical control intervention options and tools that we have for you. So Sporecaster is a white mold apothecia risk predictor. It's a phone application. It's free to download. You can get it whether you have an iPhone or Android device. And really how it works is trying to predict when these apothecia are going to germinate from the soil and pop up, because that's really the critical point at which we want to get fungicides on to protect those flowers from being infected from the spores from the apothecia. And really, this is an important tool since that's the critical time point, because it's pretty impossible to go out and scout for these apothecia. We always are encouraging farmers to go out, get a look at what's going on in their field disease-wise. But for white mold apothecia, it's pretty impossible to do on a large scale, at least. So this is someone's fingertip, so you can kind of see the scale of how absolutely tiny they are. So it's pretty impractical to ask all of you to go out and scout for apothecia and see when those are popping up to put a fungicide spray on, right? It's also not a good idea because they can be confused with a lot of other things that are in the soil as well. So this is a photo of bird's nest fungus, which is completely harmless. It's in the field just breaking down old residue, but it's often confused with these white mold apothecia, among a bunch of other things are as well. So this is a screenshot of what comes up when you're using the Sporecaster app on your phone. You can save different locations of different fields, right? So here we have a bunch of different fields across lower Michigan, and you can see that the risk levels are even pretty variable across the different parts of Michigan. We see higher risk up in the thumb area and southwest compared to these central portions. And so how Sporecaster works is you pick out your field location, you enter some basic agronomic info like your row spacing, whether your field is irrigated or not, simple things like that. And it pulls down weather data according to where you put that pin, and it spits out a predicted risk percentage. And so the default is 40%. If you're above a 40% risk, we're going to recommend you consider putting a fungicide spray on with all the other info you have available to you as well, right? And then here's another photo of those apothecia you can see. And so this is a little bit about my own personal work that we have been doing the past few years. Sporecaster is for irrigated and dry land fields, but monitoring its performance over the last few years, it appears to be underperforming compared to what we would like it to be at, and that it may need refinement for use in those irrigated fields especially. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to make new predictive models using new techniques different from the original Sporecaster development and using new data collection strategies. So I'm interested in incorporating some new irrigation inputs to try to summarize the effect of irrigation on apothecia risk, as well as soil moisture and soil temperature, since we know that those factors are really important for apothecia germination, even if they are kind of hard to measure at the field level, as well as soil texture. We know that sandy soils can take on a lot more irrigation, but if we're thinking about loamy sand or loam soils, we know that effect of irrigation on apothecia is going to be quite different than those sands. This is a photo of one of the weather stations we have set up to try to collect that soil moisture and irrigation data in field, and some apothecia we found as well. Here's a figure of some of the data we collected last year, just to show what we've been up to and what we're finding. These are 4 different locations where I went out and scouted apothecia weekly. The blue line represents that apothecia density over the sampling period, and that orange line represents what Sporecaster had predicted the risk to be. So every week I would go out and I would scout for apothecia, I would count them, find what kind of density it's at that location. And I'd also plug into my phone the different agronomic factors in that at that location and get that predicted risk from Sporecaster. This dotted blue line here is the threshold that which in field we say warrants a fungicide spray. So if your apothecia density is greater than this, I think it's 0.18 per meter squared. That's kind of the threshold that has been found in previous studies. And then this orange dotted line is the risk threshold from Sporecaster. So 40% for everything but the 30-inch. And so really what I'm trying to show here is that the overall accuracy of the Sporecaster app is 76%, which is pretty great. So looking at every observation between when I went out and scouted for apothecia and what Sporecaster said, they were in agreement 76% of the time, whether or not we were above or below that fungicide spray threshold. When looking at the timing accuracy, though, it's only 25%. And what I really mean by that is, did Sporecaster call for a fungicide spray at the same week we first saw apothecia get above that infield density threshold? So that was the case only at one location at our Montcalm 30-inch, and everywhere else, Sporecaster was already over the predicted risk for a fungicide spray before we saw the amount of apothecia in field that we would consider important for a spray. And what we consider the target accuracy for really accurate, good models that we want to encourage farmers to use is this 80 to 90%. So our overall accuracy is pretty close, but since there's kind of that critical timing component to this work, there's a lot of room for improvement still. These are some results from a 2021 product and timing trial we did. And so we have our different product trade names at our timings, and they're sorted by highest to lowest yield here. And so the takeaway from here really is that the single applications of some of the best products we know, this Endura and Omega, the Endura and Omega products, were just as good at protecting yield as these double applications of some of these other products. We encourage less. So Delara, Topspin, etc. Our untreated check is down here. And so both trying to encourage not only the timing aspect that we talked about in the last few slides, but also how efficacious your product is as well to make sure you're protecting that yield. This is our fungicide efficacy chart from the Crop Protection Network. So every year we run these fungicide efficacy trials to rate these different products, mode of action, see how well they're going to protect against white mold. And here's the list of products that are ranked good or very good. Endura is always pretty tried and true. It always ranks as the best performing product. We have Approach here, Lectivar, Omega, Propulse. So these are all fungicides. And then we have Cobra as a herbicide as well, since we know there is some effect of herbicide on keeping those apothecia from germinating in the field as well. So there's a few different modes of action to choose from as well. We aren't relying on a single one. So like I said in the past slide, if you're going to put a product down, make sure that we're doing our best to use the most efficacious, as it can really pay in the end compared to some of those less efficacious products. And you can find this at cropprotectionnetwork.org. We have this efficacy table for white mold, as well as, you can, if you're having issues with frog eye, target spot, I guess mostly we're worried about white mold here in Michigan, but there's some other really good resources there as well. So if you're going to be spraying for white mold, it's important we have our sprayer set up correctly, since we really are targeting those first few inches of that crop canopy, trying to focus on getting those flowers protected, since that's where we see infection initiate. So these are a few good points to make sure you're hitting when you are setting up your sprayer, going out to spray for white mold. So we want to aim for 15 to 20 gallons of water per acre as your flow rate. Adjust your nozzle pressure to 40 psi. Maintain ground speed at 10 miles per hour or less. Single flat fan nozzles directed straight down into the canopy is probably the best option for really penetrating that canopy and getting down in there to protect the flowers. We want to aim for fine to medium droplets, 200 to 350 microns. And when we're thinking about where we're targeting within the canopy, we want to use the midpoint in the crop canopy as target, which is typically 20 inches above the target. So here's just another way to visualize what we're talking about when we're saying where we want to spray. If this is our soybean plant here, our sprayer boom is 20 to 19 inches above that target, which is about 5 inches down into our crop canopy. So finally, just trying to summarize all these different management factors, risk factors we talked about today. There's no complete resistance, but there is partial resistance, and it does vary by variety. So make sure you're talking to your seed dealer. If you have issues with white mold, to use the best genetics you can to try to fend off some disease. We know that white mold is really weather driven. It loves cool and wet temperature, or cool conditions and wet conditions. So as we come into July, keep an eye on the weather. It can help you gauge your risk for white mold infection. And we also have that Sporecaster app that tries to summarize the effect of that weather into a risk factor for white mold. Crop rotation and cover cropping. White mold, Sclerotinia, has a large host range, but we know small grains are not infected by white mold. So that's always a really good option for crop rotation. And track your field problems. White mold being soil borne, it can be really patchy. You can have some issues some areas low-lying compared to others that will highlight some problem areas that may need more attention than others. Row spacing and seeding rate, it affects the microclimate. Denser plants hold on to that moisture and you're going to be at greater risk. You might have more apothecia like we saw. Not tilling your field helps to keep those sclerotia on the surface. Having them exposed to the environment around them can help them to degrade, because we know once they're in the soil, they can survive there for a very long time. So there's thought that if we don't till those fields, keep the sclerotia on the soil, they might degrade and our pressure might not be so bad over the years. And use effective fungicides. There's differences in efficacy of fungicides, right? And we're really only worried about this time window, R1 to R3, when those flowers are out and are ready to be infected. And make sure that sprayer's set up correctly to penetrate that canopy and get to those targeted flowers. And if you're interested in biologicals, there's some options. There's contans that have been shown to have some efficacy. And that's it for me and white mold.
Jill, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. A lot of good questions. Thank you for entering your questions. There are some excellent questions in the chat, and we'll go through those right now. And there is a mixture for both the disease section and also the weather section. So we'll start out with one here from Phil. Are there any characteristics for fields that would be predictors for white mold in soybeans? Jill or Marty, would you?
Yeah, so generally it's highly productive fields. That's generally where we see it. And then within a field, low-lying areas.
Good. Thank you. There's another question, how effective is aerial application versus ground application?
Right. Unfortunately, I don't have much data on aerial application for white mold, but certainly with either ground or aerial, we're concerned with not just getting product onto the foliage, but down into the canopy, onto the flowers where it needs to protect the plant. Good.
Thank you. And Marty's got a little put an entry into the chat that folks need to be aware of if you're on the phone, is that Sporecaster is a free app. It's available for iPhone or Android on your smartphone, and you can just download it and start using it. It's very easy to use and should be part of your arsenal against white mold. The next question is sclerotia in vegetable crops, i.e. tomatoes, peppers, green peppers, the same disease as in soybeans, and will it spread between crops?
Yep. Unfortunately, it's the same thing, and it can certainly infect whatever's in that rotation as long as it's susceptible. So most grasses are non-hosts, so corn, small grains, that's a good alternative to try and bring down some of that sclerotia load in the soil.
Good. Another really important question from Leon is, does crop rotation help diminish white mold, or does it just live in the soil regardless of the crop?
It does. It does help reduce disease pressure, but yes, unfortunately, those sclerotia can survive in the soil for many years. So it helps, but it's not going to eliminate disease, at least short rotations.
Kind of a rule of thumb, Marty, that I've always heard is that they like to germinate in the top 2 inches of the soil. So if they're buried deeper than 2 inches, they're less likely to germinate right away.
Yeah, they're just not going to have enough energy to make that mushroom on the soil surface. They have to be within that top couple of inches. So yeah, it's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Do you spray just once per season or multiple times?
We do everything in our trials, but as you know, we showed that 2021 data, a single application of Endura was better than 2 applications. So we can get, great disease management from a good product such as Endura if it's applied at the right time.
I think that's the key. The timing is really a key. If you're just going to go once, timing is really essential. All right. Another question is, actually, Marty, you made some notes here. It just says you're working to try to improve, and Jill covered this too. You're really trying to work to improve Sporecaster for irrigated soybeans, and you're working with a couple of specialists on campus to do that, Yan Suk Dong and Jamie Wilbur. Thank you for your efforts to continue to improve that. Phil's got a question is, would the fungicide products be consistent in dry land compared to irrigated situations?
For white mold management, yes. If we're talking about prophylactic sprays, that's a completely different question. But for white mold management, yes. That location that we use has really high white mold pressure, and we irrigate just to make sure that we have conditions for disease. So yeah, the data is completely relevant.
Good. Paul's got a question in here. Does residue or tillage impact disease severity?
Yes. So tillage is going to bury the sclerotia, right? So there's that element of where are the sclerotia. And then residue, it certainly appears that residue can inhibit apothecia development. So we set up a trial with Aaron Burns 2 years ago, looking at corn soy rotation. Last year, we could not find any apothecia in the field that had really heavy corn residue. And I think we just blanketed the soil so much, there was just nowhere for the apothecia to come through. So we're looking at that again this year with a tillage component. The other piece to that is that roller crimped rye has been demonstrated to create a canopy that forces apothecia formation prior to soybean flowering. And so that can be used as another white mold management tool.
Good. Marty, another rule of thumb that I've kind of picked up on tillage is if I'm planting a susceptible crop after a bad white mold sclerotia crop, then I would want to use primary tillage and bury the sclerotia. If I'm planting a resistant crop like wheat or corn, then I would want to no-till those and leave those sclerotia on the surface. Would you agree with those?
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Just keeping in mind though that if you have other sclerotia in the bank, in the soil, bank that are further down, it's not going to eliminate disease. But yes, I agree in principle that is a good strategy to try and manage white mold.
Okay. This is a kind of a really good one, but it's one I've not thought of or heard of before. It's since the ascospores, the spores that infect the blossoms. Is there a way that we can develop spore monitoring tools instead of the apothecia prediction model, but a spore monitoring tool to improve our predictions?
We have done spore trapping. And yeah, we would love to do that. It's a little bit expensive, and logistically for in-season prediction, it's kind of expensive. So it's possible, but expensive. And if we can develop a good tool or improve Sporecaster, that's also going to really be a very helpful tool, because those spores come from apothecia. They don't come out of nowhere. They come from those apothecia. So, I mean, I'd like to do both approaches, but everything takes time and it's expensive.
Good, good. Jeff, this is a question for you. When will there be, in your forecast, when will we have a 3 to 4 day window for hay to be cut and dry enough to bale?
A tough one. Nothing like throwing a nice lob ball question there. Not. It's going to be, as you can guess from the forecast, this for forage harvest for hay. This is a really tough one, and realistically, many areas are going to see probably a 3 or 4 day period that we don't see precipitation, but there's just this continuing threat because of that weather pattern on an almost daily basis. It's going to depend on your level of risk aversion, but again, any given day you've got a 20 or 30% chance, and typically, again, if you don't want to lose it or you want to risk the quality issues. And if it were me, it's just like bringing an umbrella or having a county fair and breaking a drought type of thing. There's definitely risk there. But when we look at what actually happens here over the next week, there will be a number of locations. I would guess many that go through that 3 or 4 day period. It's just finding that right window, because again, there is a threat. There's no logical, I guess this is one probably direct answer to this. There is, during the next week, there probably is not a logical 3 to 4 day period where we can be confident that there won't be precipitation. There's just again, so I hate to say that and sit on the fence, but this one it's a complicated one for forage. You could try it, but again, there certainly is a threat there. We don't see a prolonged several day event where we were really confident about not only dry, but warm. And that's another good thing too. The drying rates will be pretty high next week as those temperatures go up. So it will be really favorable from that perspective, but you've just got this threat that you could get a shower that would really turn things south quickly.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, that answers all of the questions that were in the chat. Thanks to you, those of you that entered the questions. They were very, very good questions. We have some specialists that have joined us, and I see Chris DeFonso has entered some information into the chat. Chris, if you're still on, would you please maybe provide that orally for those of us that are on the phone?
Yes, just a quick insect update. So black cutworms are still flying, and I don't usually trap this late, but it seems like the later I trap, we still continue to find them, and Paul Gross has seen them as well. So there are still fields that remain unplanted or were late planted, and there's a lot of yellow weeds out there that were probably recently sprayed, depending on the neighborhood that you drive through. So there might still be some risk out there. And the reason I haven't had any calls, I suspect, is that maybe people have been too busy to go out there and see that over the hill, maybe the stand is gone. So one of those things to look for in the next week or two. True armyworm catches, very low, just haven't seen anything. And I got my first corn borer actually yesterday, so they're starting. Leafhopper is here, but they have to build. So I'm thinking, when you get to that early part of July, that's your sweet spot to go out into your alfalfa fields and look for those. And Asiatic garden beetle is pupating now in the northern part of Ohio. So that risk is ended there. And then, in the next week or so, that pupation line will move up into the southern part of Michigan, but they're still feeding in Michigan as far as I can tell.
Good. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Are there any other specialists that want to give us an update, the things that are timely and relevant to our audience today?
While we're on the subject, I'd like to say that I'll be out doing efficacy accounts weekly, starting sometime mid-late June. And so at these virtual breakfasts, we hope to do a quick update once those start to give you guys an idea of when we're seeing apothecia, when those flushes are starting.
Very good, Jill. Thank you for that. Manny, are you on the call this morning? Dr. Singh? If not, I would like to maybe address the issue of any delayed planting on soybeans. We're just now approaching the point where we should probably be thinking about making some significant management changes. And the first one being probably variety selection. We're not there yet. Typically, Manny and I and other specialists across the country will say in mid-June, the 15th of June. But, by the time we're back in the field, we may be there. So it's probably time to talk to your rep and see those of you that are planting full season beans or even some beans that are longer than full season. We would recommend that you go a half a maturity group earlier than that, starting the 15th of June, at least a half a maturity group earlier. So keep that in mind. Probably time to scrap the 30-inch rows. They're at a disadvantage at this time of the year, and try to go to 15s or even narrower if you could. Maybe even break out the box drill or some planting equipment that you have not used for soybeans in a while would be worth doing at this time of the year. Maybe increase planting rates a little bit. Of course, that's real relevant, depending on where you're starting from. But you do probably want to increase your seeding rates as the dates get later. Those are probably the big three management practices. I would say variety selection takes the most time to maybe get through the pipeline. So I would start those discussions pretty quickly. Again, if you're planting full season beans in your area. Any other specialists have anything that you want to discuss with the audience? All right. Hearing none, I want to be sure and thank Jill and Marty and Jeff for just an outstanding presentation. Jill, it's always hard to come in and pinch hit, but you did, and excellent job. Thank you. You give us confidence in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
With that, I think we're done for today. I think we'll go ahead and end the session. Thanks for joining us.